It would appear that I missed the Halloween deadline to make a Halloween episode, but better late than never is rapidly becoming the motto of this show anyway. What's so great about Halloween? Hooligans come to your house, demand that you give them candy, vandalize your property if you refuse, and wear masks so you can't press charges. That's not a holiday, that's a protection racket. Anyway, we're here to talk about Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, one of the most beloved games on the GameCube, and often referred to as one of the best horror games of all time.
You too will come to understand fear as I have.
So maybe this will be the Halloween that I actually get to play something scary. The game sort of stars Alex Roivas, a woman who I just realized looks like Samus in street clothes, who's called to her family's estate when her grandfather turns up dead in his mansion. What's weird is the police tell Alex that her grandfather died in an accident. An accident that decapitated him and took his head away without a trace in the middle of a library. Alex stays in the mansion to look for clues about her grandfather's death and quickly discovers that Grandpappy was researching ancient mystical deities and investigating a centuries-old conspiracy to bring about the end of the world. Unknown to most people, this world has 4 godlike entities that are alternatively called Eternals or Ancients depending on the cutscene: Ulioth, Chattur'gha, Xel'lotath, and Mantarok. And Mantarok chills out on Earth, keeping the other 3 from invading and devouring humanity. An ancient Roman centurion, Pius Augustus, is corrupted and spends 2 millennia working to bring an Eternal into the world, and the game is something of an anthology as 12 playable characters across 12 time periods are drawn into Pius's plot and the struggle to save mankind. The exploits of the heroes are detailed in a magic book, the Tome of Eternal Darkness, which passes the knowledge and powers of each hero on to the next, culminating in Alex having to use their combined knowledge to stop Pius once and for all. Eternal Darkness' story takes a lot of cues from the works of H.P. Lovecraft, the guy who invented the Cthulhu mythos, and I admit I don't know jack shit about Cthulhu, so go ahead and take away one of my nerd cards. Eternal Darkness has you fighting zombies and demons, but they're not the focus of the game's horror themes. The emphasis is instead on cosmic horror, psychological horror, and existential dread. The idea is that if you found out that cosmic horrors beyond your comprehension existed, that the world will eventually be destroyed in its entirety and there's nothing you can do about it, fully grasping the magnitude of that reality would be the last sane thought in your head. Nobody who looks into that abyss comes out whole again, and even as someone who doesn't cream themselves over Cthulhu, I admit the concept makes for a compelling narrative. A loose collection of humans fighting a desperate battle to fight a god is pretty much the ultimate underdog story, and a mixture of tantalizing mysteries, a drive to see what the next chapter of the game will take you, and fascinating horror elements that you want to see play out make for a narrative that can get you deeply invested. The story is good, is what I was trying to say in a complicated manner. It's really, really good. Anyway, let's get to the gameplay. Most of the levels are linear dungeons. You make your way through a series of rooms, often crypts or lost temples, solving fairly simple puzzles and fighting enemies until you get to the end of the stage. I think this is the first time in the history of ever that a game using fixed cameras hasn't been a royal pain in my ass. The camera is very carefully programmed to slowly move and turn with you as you navigate a room, gliding into and out of positions so that you never get disoriented and the directions on the control stick don't just snap to new positions on you. If the camera has to jump to a new position between rooms, the game fades out and quickly fades back in at very clear boundaries. The levels have enough distinct rooms and the camera zooms out far enough that you never get lost or confused about where you've been, and rooms are often tight enough that you don't need to wander into one specific spot for the game to show you a crucial door or item. Note that I said often because I wandered around this damn church lost for 20 minutes until I found out there's a staircase in the back. Combat is also straightforward, yet innovative. You can hold R to focus attacks on enemy body parts, lopping off heads to prevent their Care Bear stares from draining your sanity, focusing on arms to stop them from dealing damage, or you can attack without locking on for rapid strikes. Eventually, you also get ranged weapons that you can tactically use on enemies with very specific weak points, mainly the horrors whose eyes you have to shoot out. In addition, you have a sanity meter to track as it drains whenever you encounter enemies and drains your health if it gets empty, and a magic meter that you use to cast an assortment of spells collected throughout the game, enhancing weapons, casting shields, trapping enemies, a shockwave attack, fields that constantly restore meters. There are several tactical ways to use magic in combat. It probably sounds like Eternal Darkness has a great combat system, prioritizing enemies in combat and strategically popping spells to fit each situation. I know this game is a classic, but I can't change how I feel. Eternal Darkness's combat system is terrible, and the core gameplay is pure tedium. And it all comes down to one factor. Once you reach Chapter 6, you've acquired healing spells that can restore your health or sanity on command, and once you gain this ability, every non-boss monster in the game becomes your bitch. Every time I ran into an enemy that caught me off guard or was out of my league, all I had to do was run into the previous room, pop heals until I was back at full health, then run back into the room and wreck that monster's shit. Your magic regenerates every time your character takes a step, enemies can't follow you into other rooms, and enemies don't respawn, so it's piss easy to find an empty room, walk in circles to generate infinite magic for yourself, and restore yourself to full health and cast all of the buffs on yourself for every time that you go into combat. You can completely break the combat system to the point of non-effort, provided you're patient enough to sit on ass a few minutes to restore enough magic. The game almost seems to encourage this strategy. Spells can't be cast in combat since you have to sit still for them to cast, and once you've taken a few hits, your character limps to where you can't reliably dodge attacks. You're damn near meant to run away and heal up when things go sideways, because at low health you lack the ability to do anything else. There was only one encounter in the entire game where my strategy didn't work. Gatekeeper enemies can spawn other monsters, and one kept spawning horrors in a tight hallway with no room to maneuver, and you know what I did for that encounter? I just ran away into the next room because often there is no damn penalty for skipping combat altogether and just running past enemies. I have said in the past that I don't care if a game is easy. I have always said and will continue to say that games just need to be fun and or stimulating, and Eternal Darkness's easily broken to the point of non-effort tank/runaway/heal combat system is not stimulating. This requires no skill, strategy, or effort. All it takes is patience and a low assessment of the value of your time. When the game's TV tropes page actually lists such basics as using melee weapons and walking in circles as game-breaking mechanics, you have fucked up! And it's tragic because you get flashes of what a great combat system the game would have if the magic wasn't so broken. Levels 4 and 5, before you get the healing spells, are tense survival stages where you have to adequately prepare for combat, diligently evade enemies, and strategically use trapper enemies to restore your health or sanity when you get desperate. Later levels wait to give you the Tome of Eternal Darkness and thus access to your spells until after you've encountered several enemies, lending more tension to the combat. Spells take time and require you to sit still to cast, thus emphasizing preparation for combat. If magic were a more limited resource, or maybe if the healing spells were pulled out entirely, this could have been a great survival horror combat system encouraging tactics and cunning. Instead, it's just one long boring battle of attrition after another. To be completely fair, I may have been inadvertently playing the game on its easy difficulty. At the end of the first chapter, you have Pius pick one of 3 artifacts, which determines which Eternal is the main villain for that run, and the game will change its cutscenes and rebalance its enemies depending on which you choose. If you choose the red artifact of Chattur'gha at the start of the game, you'll predominantly fight enemies that take more hits to kill. If you choose the blue artifact of Xel'lotath, more enemies will zap you and drain your magic, and because I had no idea what was going on, I chose the green artifact and spent the whole game fighting Xel'lotath, whose minions drain your sanity. Being at low sanity is often a minor inconvenience, and sometimes you actually want it, so it's possible I was playing on the game's de facto easy mode, but I don't really see how changing the enemies so that combat takes longer or making me take more breaks to generate magic would drastically change my problems. Why would I say that you want to be at low sanity if low sanity drains your health? 'Cause that's the fun part of the game. The lower your sanity meter gets, the camera tilts to an off-putting Dutch angle, the soundtrack fills with ambient screaming, and blood starts flowing out of the walls and ceiling, which really do improve the atmosphere drastically. Get to really low sanity, and the game will actually start breaking the fourth wall to try and screw with the player, like this instance where I tried to heal myself and POOF! Jesus Christ! Run around long enough at low sanity and the game will simulate hardware failures, pretend to trigger game-breaking glitches, or just insta-kill your character, all of which is followed by a white flash teleporting to the previous room and your character yelling, "This isn't happening!"
This isn't really happening.
Your character will sink into the floor, the game will pretend to shut off your console or TV, the game will pretend that the video cable has become unplugged, I saw the game pretend to reset itself, your character's head and arms will fly off one by one, and the game actually snarks at you if you try to equip a weapon whilst having no arms, and most legendarily, the game will pretend to erase your saved games when you go to save, which sadly I was not able to trigger myself. My personal favorites that actually threw me for a loop were opening the pause menu to find my inventory had been wiped, and after one of the levels the game cuts off and shows an advertisement to be continued in a sequel. I know that the game's insanity effects are meant to mess with the player and make you paranoid that you're not safe from the game's influence, but once you figure out what's going on, the insanity effects are funny, not scary. When the game cut to a blue screen of death, I honestly burst out laughing. It gets to the point you start running around in bat crap crazy mode on purpose just to see what kind of weird shit you can get to happen, especially since the insanity effects don't impede your ability to make progress. Aside from the sanity effects being really cool, sanity can be healed at will the same as health, so anybody playing semi-competently is never going to run low on sanity anyway, at least outside of momentary lapses or boss battles. A lot of the game's other mechanics feel pointless as well. The game has enemies called trappers that don't actually attack you. They teleport you to a pocket dimension full of easy-to-avoid enemies where you can restore your health, magic, or sanity for free, and then you warp right back to where you were. Early in the game, it's kind of a tactical decision to trigger a trapper and get sent here to heal, but once you get the healing spells, there is literally no point to these enemies other than to drag out the game by forcing you to lug your way to the exit. Different characters have different stats, like some people can run longer or have more sanity or magic, but all the characters can wreck a monster shit with any melee weapon, and all of them have the stamina and speed to flee from combat, so the differences have minimal to no impact on the gameplay. You can mix and prepare your own spells, which really serves no purpose other than you might be able to get the magic pool and monster possession spells early, and the former of those is a total game breaker. The game has an elemental rock paper scissors system that really just overcomplicates the magic system. Each of the three villains is strong and weak to another of the Eternals, so green enemies are weak to red spells, red are weak to blue, and so on, and there are 3 variants to each spell. Variants that all do the same damn thing, and you only ever face enemies of one alignment at a time. It's also annoying that when the game gives you the ability to cast more powerful versions of your spells, you can't actually use the buffed version of a spell until you go into the game's inventory and manually mix the buffed version of every single spell yourself. Most of the gameplay that's not spent beating up enemies is spent solving puzzles, most often lock and key puzzles where you wander around looking for some item or spell to enter the next room. And while there are some pretty decent puzzles in the game, like summoning a trapper to enter a room and teleport out an obstacle bracing a door, the nature of these puzzles means there's inevitably going to come a point where you just wander around aimlessly looking for the item you need, wondering what the hell you're missing. Being stymied because one letter in the World War I chapter has to be used as an item, or because a letter that you need to advance chapter 5 is tucked in a corner where you can barely see it. The worst level in the game by a country mile is chapter 6, where half of the items that you need are hidden behind cobwebs that blend into the environment, so you trek around booby-trapped corridors, constantly taking damage and constantly healing so that you're never in any real danger, trying to figure out where the hell the next glorified key is hiding. You will come to understand boredom as I have. 3 of the game's levels take place in a non-linear church level that's usually easy to sequence break, so at one point I killed a mini-boss without having any weapons. The last level is also a bitter disappointment as you spend at least half an hour wandering around empty corridors, encountering almost no enemies apart from the trappers that don't hurt you. You have to go through this long-ass set of corridors in 2 separate levels, but at least the first time there are mini-boss guardians to fight the whole way. You finally let us play as modern-day Samus, who has maxed out stats in basically every area, and you use her to walk through empty hallways for 40 fucking minutes! What the hell? The game almost outright requires a walkthrough for the Black Guardian boss fight. This boss is only vulnerable when it's glowing, so after the first phase, where all my attacks seem to deal damage, the second phase comes and all my hits just get shrugged off with no hint as to what's going on. The boss starts summoning 3 zombie monsters at once, and the boss will only glow and allow you to land a hit if you ignore all 3 zombies, which no intelligent player would ever do. If the idea was to convey insanity by having a boss that violates all common sense and logic, you still failed because he who sacrifices game design to make a pretentious point deserves neither. I better pivot to some more positive points before the hate mail flows, because in spite of the gameplay getting very tedious, I did really enjoy Eternal Darkness as an interactive narrative. The visuals and atmosphere are fantastic as you traverse dark, isolated, surreal locales with beautiful yet haunting and mysterious music. Between levels, you return to Alex, wandering around the mansion looking for the next chapter of the tome to continue the game, and it serves as some good downtime, but the further you get into the game, the more haunted the mansion becomes, gradually invading your one safe space and raising the stakes and tension of the story. I like how the game has optional side quests without direct directly telling you about them, including a quest across 3 chapters to get an enchanted sword for the finale, a secret in Chapter 6 to get a Mantarok rune that I'm told breaks the game even more, an optional sword that makes the church levels much easier, and rescuing civilians where possible will get you powerful spare weapons. It adds more depth and life to the game and rewards you for playing diligently. As many times as I got burned by the game's total lack of checkpoints and forcing you to save manually, it did give me some real moments of dread, freaking out as a monster started kicking my ass and I realized I hadn't saved for a while. And no matter how tedious the gameplay got, I was very much invested into the story and eager to play all the way to the end. Eternal Darkness' story is a true epic, mixing several different kinds of horror. You've got the cosmic horror, but you've also got some compelling body horror. Enemies called bone thieves take over human hosts with sickening and grotesque descriptions of how they manipulate their hosts. Characters get zombified and trapped in rotting bodies for centuries, and there's one exceptionally screwed up moment where Pius makes a monument by piling live bodies into a pillar, including one of the main characters, and then pouring cement to fill in the pillar. Hands down, the scariest chapter to me is Chapter 5. The protagonist of this level is attacked by bone thieves masquerading as his servants, and the eternal paranoia that anybody near him could turn out to be a bone thief and try to kill him drives him completely insane to where he's thrown helpless into an insane asylum.
May the rats eat your eyes! I am now lost to your cause! The darkness comes! It will damn us all!
We later get hints, and eventually are explicitly shown, that he murdered his entire staff, and you can go back and listen to his analyses of the game's various enemies, with spectacular voice acting conveying just how pants-shitting terrifying that kind of mental state would be.
Their bodies made no sense, no heads, no organs, an empty husk, devoid of the trappings of nature, but it walked, it sang. Oh, give us the blessing of ignorance, the happiness of oblivion.
Part of what makes Eternal Darkness' story so compelling is that it has down-to-earth horror elements mixed in with the cosmic space Godzilla stuff. At the end of the day, the main villain isn't a dark god who's planned the extinction of mankind for centuries. It's a regular human with authority and a disregard for the people around him, wrecking the planet and ruining countless lives because screw you, got mine. He's just another corrupt politician. A few chapters revolve around a conspiracy that Pius forms inside the Catholic Church, drawing upon how many actual atrocities have been carried out in the name of religion and gone unpunished because the church is so damn powerful. The chapter where you play as a World War I journalist scared shitless on the front lines and surrounded by despair and corpses is one of the more gripping and haunting chapters of the game before anything supernatural happens. The relatable elements of the story make the plot more compelling, grounding a fantastic story in just enough realism to make it more immersive. Most of the characters are, speaking bluntly, total ciphers, but we empathize enough with their situations that we still find them compelling and want to see them get through alive. An architect kidnapped by a warlord and fearing for his survival, a monk framed for murder during the Spanish Inquisition.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition!
An innocent slave girl looking for adventure that gets dropped into a horror show way over her head, and my man Kareem, who seeks out one of the Eternal's artifacts so that he can be with his true love.
I fear I desire you many 100 times more than you love me.
You speak to my soul, my good man. You also genuinely fear for the characters because most of them either die horribly or just wish that they could, often having accomplished very little. But there are just enough hope spots that you never give up on the game, and the characters return in later chapters as ghosts so that every plot thread comes full circle and ties together into one story. The only real loose ends in the plot are we never find out why Pius built the Pillar of Flesh, aside from a pillar of people buried alive looks good on the evil warlock resume, I guess, and at some point the evil church sect just kind of disappears, though I think it's implied the Black Guardian boss ate them when they ran out of sacrifices. The game has a few conveniences and asspulls as items just randomly appear exactly when you need them, but the game's secret ending explains those away as Mantarok guiding the heroes into eliminating the Eternals for him, as well as providing a reason why you're supposed to play the game 3 times to fight all 3 Eternals. Basically, each playthrough of the game is an alternate timeline, and Mantarok manipulates time to combine all the time streams together and create a reality where all 3 Eternals are dead, and it's left to its own vague and potentially deadly agenda. The game's ending is epic as all get out, as Alex summons a second Eternal to battle Pius's, and she faces Pius with the spirits of the other protagonists helping out. After ages of build-up, we finally see 2 Eternals summon and fight each other, and it's awesome! Even if my brain kept pointing out this looks exactly like the summoning animations for Ace monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I half expect Red Nova Dragon to throw down with them, the only problem with the ending is the final boss is way too easy. You attack the artifact powering Pius while he just kind of slowly lumbers around. I guess 2,000 years of decay doesn't help the cardio, and you totally kick the guy's ass with barely a fight once you know what to do. Great from a story perspective, mediocre from a gameplay perspective. Encapsulates the whole game in more ways than one. Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem is still a classic game with a compelling, unique, and well-written story and a great atmosphere to keep you engrossed in the game. The problem is that story has to prop up some seriously mediocre gameplay that drags the game down despite flashes of greatness and squandered potential. For what a legacy and reputation the game has, I was really hoping for more of a complete package. Put it this way, I'm still interested to replay the game and see how the story and cutscenes change. But I'm gonna play Spider-Man's New Game Plus first.